Thank you, Doctor.
Well, thank you. I want to thank you all for providing the opportunity to speak with you today about parental alienation. As you see, my name is Dr. Jennifer Harman, and I'm an associate professor of psychology at Colorado State University and an internationally recognized expert on parental alienation due to the research that I conduct on this topic. And it is the primary area of research that I focus on. And I'm here today as a scientist, not as an advocate. As policymakers, I know you understand the importance of making evidence-based recommendations and decisions. And this is difficult to do if you don't have a thorough background and understanding of a topic. So I hope today will provide you with that evidence base on parental alienation research that you need, and that I have the opportunity to answer your questions either today or afterwards. I also hope that being here today can help us find some commonalities and bridges for collaborations that can help children and families, which I believe is a goal that we all share. Now you might be thinking, this is a commission about child support. What relevance is this presentation on parental alienation to us? Well, first, I would like to believe that we all care about children and their well-being. Family violence threatens children's well-being, and so it should be a concern for all of us. And I will explain why parental alienation is a form of family violence that's been accepted within the scientific community and needs greater understanding in professional settings. Second, most of you are familiar with research that shows that non-custodial parents are often more likely to pay their child support obligations if they have visitation rights. And they're able to exercise those rights without obstacles. And their perceptions of equity are important. Parental alienating behaviors are one of the barriers that stand between a custodial parent, feelings of equity, and the exercise of visitation, which we understand to be critical to children's well-being. And last, institutions often play an inadvertent role in the perpetuation of family conflicts, including parental alienation. For example, if there are accounting system problems in the collection and distribution of child support payments, this can exacerbate existing conflicts between parents and parents who alienate their children to take advantage of these types of issues to punish and abuse the alienated parent. Finding ways to prevent the contribution to existing problems is one simple way to help. So in the time I have today, I will explain why and how I have come to be an expert on this topic of research. And then I will describe what parental alienation is, what it's not, and how we can determine whether it's happening in a family. I will also describe some of the misunderstandings and mischaracterizations of parental alienation that have circulated and what the scientific evidence has to offer regarding them. And I hope to leave about 10 to 15 minutes at the end for questions, so I'll ask that obviously questions be held until that time. Now, I'm currently a tenured associate professor in psychology at Colorado State University, where I've been employed since I earned my doctorate degree in social psychology from the University of Connecticut in 2005. I also earned 3 master's degrees leading up to that point in psychology, social psychology, and 2 in counseling psychology from Columbia University. And if you did not know already, CSU is a Research 1 university, meaning it's classified as a type of university that engages in the highest level of research activity. And in order for me to have gotten tenure and promoted to associate professor, I had to have demonstrated research excellence. I've also been working a lot in the area of intimate relationships, which is my primary area of focus. I've been an active scientist in this area for 20 years, and I studied the influence of current and past intimate partners and family members on a variety of public health outcomes, starting initially with sexual and maternal health risks and prevention and substance abuse among criminal justice populations. And I've spent over the last decade now focusing almost exclusively on domestic violence and the broader study of family violence, which includes parental alienation. Over the course of my academic career, I've published over 35 peer-reviewed scientific articles, 14 books and book chapters, and several professional reports based on the grant funding of my research. And I recently received an award for faculty excellence by my university for my research on the topic of parental alienation. I've also been actively involved in my field, doing editorial service for some of the top journals in psychology. I serve on the board of the Parental Alienation Study Group, which is an international association of scientists, practitioners, and civil society members, and was recently elected to serve as a term as the president of the International Council on Shared Parenting, which is a sister organization of Parental Alienation Study Group. I'm regularly invited to give keynote talks at conferences and conduct trainings for attorneys, mental health providers. I'm conducting an 8-hour training for the New Mexico Bar Association next week. I also provide expert witness testimony on criminal and family law cases where parental alienation is believed to be true or to be happening. Now, in 1980, social psychologist Jerome Singer, who studied attitudes and persuasion for many years, wrote that human belief systems have one striking characteristic. They are all true. They may be incorrect, but my beliefs are true for me at the time that I hold them. This statement indicates that when people's beliefs are very different from each other, and they are adamant that each of their beliefs are true, one or both may not be accurate. I really like this quote because it recognizes that everyone's perspectives are important and true for them. And it also reflects the possibility that beliefs can be changed over time if accurate information is applied to them. Now, science has its roots in philosophy, and at the crux of both science and philosophy is how we come to know what we know. Anecdotal experiences are one way of knowing. Personal experiences are powerful and descriptive. Yet in and of themselves, anecdotal experiences or individuals' life stories, even when accumulated over time, can only tell us so much. As people experienced in court matters, you know that evidence exists on a continuum, with some forms being more reliable than others. What I'm here to present is scientific evidence, which has been developed under strict research rules and practices, and has been reviewed by fully credentialed peers to attest to its validity. I will provide citations for my sources, and will favor citations that review the scientific literature that has accumulated on this topic, so that you can review this information yourself. So what is parental alienation? Parental alienation is a mental condition in a child when the child has aligned strongly with one parent and then rejects their other parent without legitimate justification. This means that the alienated parent is rejected by the child for trivial or exaggerated or untrue reasons, not for something that any normally functioning parent would have done. Now, no parent is perfect, right? Children get angry with their parents for a whole host of things, such as when we enforce their bedtime, or not being happy about being grounded, or losing phone privileges because they broke the rules for using too much screen time. Those are normal parenting practices, and most children don't persistently and consistently reject that parent for months or even years for doing them. That is something that's unique for many alienated children. Parental alienation is not the same as estrangement. These terms are often used interchangeably, but in the scientific literature in this area, they mean very different things. Estrangement refers to a situation where the child resists or refuses contact with the parent for legitimate reasons. These would be cases where a parent may have very deficient parenting skills, meaning outside the range of normal, and/or there's been abuse or neglect that would warrant a child's resistance to spending time with them. Sometimes the issue can also lie with the child, or both the parent and child within their relationship. But the key differentiator here is that the parent-child issue lies within the parent-child relationship, largely independent of the influence of another person. Now, estrangement also looks quite different than parental alienation because the child's rejection is not often persistent and consistent, and there's not a coinciding strong alliance with the other parent. Also, the estranged child often feels ambivalence towards the parent that they are rejecting. Now, this distinction between estrangement and parental alienation explains why parental alienation feels so counterintuitive at times. When a child rejects a parent and refuses to have a relationship with them, many people assume that the rejected parent must have done something wrong for the child to warrant that extreme of a behavior. And it does seem counterintuitive to infer that a child would reject a healthy, loving parent with whom they previously had a good relationship. Yet if you've ever worked with abused or maltreated children, you may have noted what other professionals who work with moderately and severely maltreated children report, including children who were physically abused. One recent study documented that professionals working with these children report them as engaging in attachment-enhancing behaviors, rather than attachment destructive behaviors. So these abused children were trying to preserve, not distance themselves from their abusive parent. Likewise, children in foster care have been found to yearn for their birth parents, experience fear and anxiety about being separated from them, and they minimize the maltreatment that their birth parents perpetrated against them. In other words, children who are abused by a parent engage in behaviors to preserve and protect the relationship. They don't often seek to destroy it. So when you see a child actively and persistently rejecting another safe and normal parent and aligning with their other parent, there's a red flag that there could potentially be alienation going on. Now, parental alienation is also not the same as a loyalty conflict. Loyalty conflicts involve a child feeling caught between two of their parents. And in these cases, both parents might engage in behaviors that are not great, and it's often in an attempt to get the child to pick their side or to relay messages between them. Now, this situation is different because the child tries to maintain positive relationships with both of their parents, but they're stuck in the middle. And then both parents try to involve the child in their conflict, and they feel pulled in all directions. And this causes significant stress on the child. And in these cases, the child will often pull away and distance themselves from both of their parents. And it can get so bad that the child eventually picks a side just to be done with it, in which case the loyalty conflict can turn into parental alienation. Now, we do not yet know how often this particular trajectory occurs, and it's largely because the majority of research on this topic is focused on cases where one parent was the primary perpetrator of behaviors that resulted in alienation. I'm currently working on a research project to get at this particular question a little bit more closely. So if parental alienation is not estrangement or a loyalty conflict, what do we know about why a child would be alienated from a competent and present parent? There's been over 35 years of accumulated empirical evidence about parental alienation, and about 40% of what we know today has been published in the last 4 years alone. The best way for me to answer the question about what we know is to describe how we can effectively differentiate alienated children from those who are not alienated. The 5-factor model builds on the scientific evidence in order to do this. To conclude that a child has been alienated from a parent, there needs to be evidence for all 5 of these factors. I will briefly go into each of these factors you see here and the scientific support for each of them. Now, I've already talked about factor 1 and the empirical support for this factor, which relates to the clear and persistent rejection of a parent. The degree of this rejection is an indication of how severe the parental alienation has gotten. And it's important to mention that not all children who are exposed to behaviors of a parent become alienated. In fact, a small proportion do. And we don't know exactly what unique factors these children have that make them resilient to it. That's a really interesting area of research that people are starting to explore right now. Now, at the mild stages, a child may show signs of resistance when they have to go see a parent that they're being alienated from. But once they're in the care of this rejected parent, they settle in and they're able to enjoy their time together, as long as it's not disturbed or undermined by the other parent. For example, Johnny might cry and cling to his dad, his preferred parent, when he's dropped off for parenting time with his mom, the rejected parent. But after about an hour or two, settles in and enjoys his time with his mom. The transitions can be tough, and the child still longs for time with mother when he's not with her. But if Johnny is mildly alienated, he learns that he cannot openly express these feelings of longing for his mother to his father, because his father may discourage him or punish him for expressing those feelings, or he feels like he's betraying his dad if he shares those feelings with him. At the moderate stages of parental alienation, the child more actively rejects their parent, and the transitions become even more difficult. For example, Samantha could take a day or two to settle in and act normal around her dad, who's the rejected parent, assuming her mother does not interfere by texting all the time, asking if she's okay or feels safe. Samantha spends hours in her room and doesn't come out for dinner. She does not openly express missing her father and may enjoy doing things together, like going to an amusement park, but not necessarily because they are together as father and daughter. She just enjoys doing the activity itself. This is because the moderately alienated child has started to psychologically split their feelings towards this parent. They move from a normal, healthy ambivalence that we have towards people to being more consistently negative towards this rejected parent. And at the severe stage, we see much more constant and persistent rejection. These children, often with the approval of the alienating parent, choose not to see the alienated parent anymore. They more actively engage in disparaging them, even destroying their property or running away when forced to see them. They will block the alienated parent's phone calls and text messages and to tell the parent they don't ever want to see them again and wish they were dead. This staging of severity is a lot like the staging of cancer. Mild does not mean it's not painful or serious. It just means intervention needs to happen quickly, otherwise it's harder to treat. And there are more options for treatment earlier in the process. So if we see persistent and consistent rejection, that's support for factor 1 and is not something that we expect to see for estrangement or loyalty conflict children who don't reject their other parent and want to have a relationship with both of their parents. Factor 2 is whether there's previously a positive relationship between the child and the now rejected parent. If there was a previously good relationship, then this indicates that something happened to change the affection and that there was something positive there to begin with, that an alienated child then later denies or suppresses. Children do not naturally just cut off all their affection for a parent, and they tend to have a healthy degree of ambivalence because, again, nobody's perfect. So if there's evidence for factor 2, this means that something happened to cause factor 1. Now, there are several good studies that have documented this factor as being true for parents who were later alienated from their children. For example, one survey of guardian ad litems who conducted custody evaluations indicated that prior to parental alienation occurring, 91% reported the existence of quality parenting time and the rejected parent as having good parenting skills before resistance to parenting time became an issue. Now, when we compare factor 2 across the different forms of family conflict, we would expect to see evidence for parental alienation and loyalty conflicts, where the child still has positive relationships with both parents. Factor 2 may or may not have been evident in cases of estrangement, depending on the reason for the estrangement. Now, one exception for factor 2 is in families where a parent was never allowed to be part of the child's life from the start. For example, a mother may not have informed the father that she was pregnant, and he only learned of this later. In such cases, the father may not have had parenting time to bond with the child. Even in this situation, it's odd to conclude that the child would persistently and consistently reject the parent without some sort of influence. Do elementary school or middle school children reject a brand new teacher when they meet them at the start of the academic year? These children often readily form close relationships with their teachers without therapy, and they see them as good and bad. They don't kick and scream and threaten to run away if they have to spend an hour or two in class with them. So if alienation were to occur in these cases, other factors in this model need to be looked at more closely, and interventions involve opportunities for the parent and the child to develop a new bond with each other. The third factor is absence of abuse or neglect or maltreatment by the rejected parent. This factor is very important because if there is presence of abuse, neglect, or really deficient parenting skills well outside the range of normalcy, then parental alienation would not be the problem for the family. It would be ruled out as an explanation of the child's rejection. In a significant proportion of court cases where parental alienation is alleged or found, allegations of abuse are made. These allegations are really important to investigate carefully because no one wants there to be violence or abuse in families. If there's legitimate abuse, the family needs intervention and support to heal. The perpetrator needs services, and the child or parent needs protection and safety plans in place until it's determined that there are no further risks for the child or the parent. And in these cases, there may be estrangement between the child and their abusive parent. But if the allegations are later determined to be unsubstantiated or false and are used to obtain a custody advantage or push the other parent away, then this behavior would be considered a parental alienating behavior, which is factor 4. Here, it's important to have skilled evaluators who can determine whether there's legitimate safety concerns. And there are reliable and valid measurement tools to do this, and training and other things are always available, and I have lots of connections if anybody's interested in learning more about that. So for factor 3, we would see an absence of abuse, neglect, or maltreatment, where there's parental alienation and loyalty conflicts. But you would see evidence for it in cases where there's estrangement. Factor 4 refers to the use of parental alienating behaviors by the favored parent. Now, it's important to clarify here what we mean by parental alienating behaviors, because there's a lot of misunderstandings about how they are defined. Again, no parent is perfect, and I'm sure we've all said or done things to our children or others that we have later regretted. Those are not likely to be considered a parental alienating behavior. In order to be classified as one, it needs to be part of a larger pattern of behaviors used over time that harm the targeted parent or the alienated parent and the relationship with the child. So a child overhearing a father bad-mouthing their mother to a teacher in and of itself would not be considered an alienating behavior. It's bad behavior. It's not a great parenting choice. But if the father did this while also speaking bad about the mother to the child directly or to other third parties like the dentist, engaged in strategies to limit the mother's contact with the child, made the child feel guilty for wanting to see their mother, interrogated the child when he returned from visits with the mother, and these were all done over time, then that bad mouthing to the teacher would be classified as a parental alienating behavior. In other words, if a parent is unable to contact a child for a few times a week when they're in the care of the other parent, that doesn't necessarily mean that the other parent is engaging in parental alienating behaviors. But if the other parent is also doing a lot of other behaviors like what I will describe shortly, then it would be considered a parental alienating behavior. So in other words, you can't understand the health of a forest by looking at one tree. You have to look at all the trees to see how they're related to each other. It's the same with these types of behaviors. You cannot take one behavior out of context. You have to understand the pattern of behaviors in order to determine if it's an alienating behavior. Another important characteristic of parental alienating behaviors is that the preferred or alienating parent is the primary perpetrator of them, and they are used in a proactive way. The targeted or alienated parent does not often reciprocate, and if they do, it's often reactive or out of anger, frustration, self-defense. And while their response may not be great or a good parenting choice, their options for responding are often limited due to the behaviors of the alienating parent. Now, my research, along with others in this area, have focused a lot of attention on these types of behaviors to understand them better. And they are considered by many to be a form of family violence. And I will explain briefly now why this is the case. Now, if you're familiar with research on intimate partner violence, this power and control wheel is likely familiar to you. The wheel is a tool used by the most commonly used intervention in the United States and Canada for men who are court-sanctioned for domestic assault treatment, the Duluth model. One set of behaviors on this wheel is the use of children as a strategy to make women stay in their relationships with abusive men. For example, male abusers have been found to engage in prolonged custody battles and use parenting visitation as a way to continue abusing mothers. And they threaten to abduct or harm children if mothers do not comply with their wishes. Children are also described as being manipulated to serve as informants to their abusive fathers regarding their mother's behaviors as a means of control. Women who have been assaulted by a male partner frequently report the use of children as a means of controlling or hurting them. The majority of these women also report that the father attempted to turn their children against them. Now, women are not the only victims of intimate partner violence. In the last 12 months, it's estimated that 5.2% of men, compared to 5.5% of women, have been victims of intimate partner violence, which includes sexual violence, physical violence, and stalking. Similar proportions, 34 to 36% of men and women, report lifetime psychological aggression by an intimate partner. Although rates of violence and victimization and perpetration between women and men are similar, women suffer the greater share of serious life-threatening injuries. But many male victims of intimate partner violence also describe their current or former partners as having used their children to control and abuse them. For example, male victims report that their female partners tell the children lies about them, undermine their authority, and call them names in front of their children. They tell them they will take their children away and threaten that they will never see them again. They'll use children for their personal gain, don't let them see them, and make false allegations of abuse after they leave the relationship. Male victims of severe intimate partner violence say that one of the main reasons they do not leave their abusive partners is fear of never seeing their children again, and that their partners threaten to file false claims of abuse towards them if they leave. Now, although the use of children has been accepted as a strategy of parents who use coercive controlling violence, otherwise known as intimate terrorists or batterers, that they use these behaviors to control and exert power over their victims, there's been considerable professional and scholarly resistance to labeling these actions as parental alienating behaviors. But they're the same thing. Dr. Mandy Mathewson and I recently reused the power and control wheel to map parental alienating behaviors that have been documented in the empirical literature since before 1985. Alienating parents use a wide variety of behaviors to coercively control and threaten the alienated parent, and the use of children is one of the ways that they accomplish these acts. For example, alienating parents manipulate children to spy on the alienated parent, reward them for rejecting the parent, and tell the child that the alienated parent abandoned them and never loved them. In more serious cases, the alienating parent abducts the child, hiding them away for years from the alienated parent. Legal and administrative aggression is a particularly effective strategy to obtain and maintain custody of children, especially by mothers, because of a lot of social beliefs that men are more abusive than women. This form of aggression occurs when a parent uses legal and administrative systems, such as the courts, law enforcement, child protection services, in a manipulative and abusive way when the relationship between the parties ends. This form of intimate partner violence involves legal manipulations, such as false allegations of abuse, frivolous lawsuits, threats to ruin the target parent's reputation at work and in the community, and threats to take the target's money and possessions. Now, across the research literature on parental alienating behaviors, parents who have been alienated from their children often report leaving relationships with the alienating parent because the alienating parent was abusive, and because the abusive parent, regardless of their gender, has tried to or has succeeded in turning their children against them after leaving. So these same parental alienating behaviors have long been described by male and female victims of intimate partner violence, but they've just been labeled differently. Intimate partner violence and parental alienating behaviors have been argued to be the two sides of the same coin by some legal scholars. And I think, to be more accurate, they are the exact same thing with a different name. We call them parental alienating behaviors because we study them in relation to how they impact the children. When children are used as weapons, how does this affect them? That's parental alienation, and is something that a lot of domestic violence scholars would really benefit from incorporating into their work. And I'm working with several researchers and scholars in that area to do just that. Now, when there's evidence of parental alienating behaviors, as defined by the pattern use of clusters of behaviors over time, and these behaviors are largely unreciprocated, and there's clear power differentials between parents and the family, which is characteristic of coercively controlling abusive relationships, then we would say there's evidence for factor 4. Again, no parent is perfect. So even if you see a few behaviors over time, typically in reaction to a situation, and one parent's not the primary perpetrator, then you're likely describing a loyalty conflict or even estrangement, but they are not likely meeting the definition of what we call parental alienating behaviors. Factor 5 refers to outcomes in the child that are largely unique for alienated children. When an abusive parent makes the child believe they were abandoned by or not loved by their other parent, this leads the child to feel afraid of them or to believe that they were harmed by them. And in this way, the abusive parent undermines the attachment the child has to the other parent. If there was evidence for factor 2, meaning the child previously had a positive attachment to the now rejected parent, then this situation creates extreme cognitive dissonance in the child. How can the child love a parent that they now are led to believe abandoned them, never loved them, or that they should feel unsafe around? To resolve this dissonance and cope with the pain of rejecting this formerly loved parent, the child will start to manifest some, if not all, of these manifestations you see here to some degree. Severely alienated children typically display all of these manifestations. I will briefly describe these in a slightly different order that makes the process simpler to understand. When the child is encouraged to believe that the rejected parent abandoned them or never loved them, the alienated parent is often powerless to correct their misperceptions or feelings towards them. The child interprets any type of explanation or clarification that they give as an attack on the alienating parent that they've aligned with. So if a parent tries to correct the child's misperceptions or distorted memories of events, or even lies that have been told to them, the child will provide reflexive support to defend the alienating parent's actions. This response is driven by fear of losing their attachment to the alienating parent, who's the only parent the child feels that they have left. They protect their abuser. For example, if a child tells their mother that she never paid her child support, when the mother regularly paid her child support, and then the mother tries to tell the child that what he said is not true, the child will think mom is calling dad a liar and defend dad. The alienated mother is unable to correct the misperceptions of her child. The other signs include a child's campaign of denigration against the alienated parent, such that they vehemently and matter-of-factly say that they want nothing to do with them because they despise or hate them. For example, a child will tell her teacher and friends how much she hates her dad and that he never loved her. Such statements are made with an apparent lack of guilt about the alienated parent's feelings. The child who's alienated feels hurt and rejected by the alienated parent due to the influence of the alienating parent. And so the child suppresses their positive feelings towards the alienated parent and does not express any outward concern for how their words or behaviors affect them. Perhaps the most studied manifestation over the last few years is lack of ambivalence, which is when the child views the alienated parent as all bad and the alienating parent as all good. So an alienated teenager will have nothing but negative things to say about their mother and claim that dad is his best friend and has done nothing wrong or is a victim of mother's behaviors. This manifestation really starts at the moderate and severe stages of parental alienation. These children view their parents in polarized black and white terms, while children who've been abused or neglected in other ways feel ambivalent towards their abuser oftentimes. They're often upset and frightened, blame themselves, and also yearn for things to be better. So this demonization of one parent and idealization of the other is something that's unique to alienated children. Now, in order to cope with the cognitive dissonance of rejecting a parent that they previously loved, the child must change their attitudes and/or their behavior towards the parent. No matter how perfect or normal the alienated parent is, an alienated child has to look for some reason to justify why they don't want to go and spend their parenting time with them. So another manifestation of parental alienation is weak or frivolous rationalizations for the child's complaints about the alienated parent. For example, children will say they don't ever want to visit with the alienated parent because their house is boring, or they don't like the way that that parent cooks. When challenged, these children will double down and then offer increasingly dramatic reasons for their rejection, escalating quickly from saying dad's house is boring to dad is mean and abusive. And so weaknesses that most children would overlook or forgive are often exploited by alienated children and the alienating parent to provide a justification for rejection of them. Alienated children will also spontaneously claim that no one ever told them to say bad things about the alienated parent, a phenomenon called independent thinker. This out of context statement points to an agenda that the child is trying to accomplish. to argue that their rejection of the alienated parent is their own idea and that their rejection has not been influenced by anyone else. Likewise, the child may use borrowed scenarios, such as the use of age-inappropriate language or phrasing that was borrowed from an adult, like a 4-year-old saying that dad needs anger management classes, or remembering things that happened in the past related to the alienated parent that the child had no direct knowledge or ability to recall, such as saying how they knew that their mom never changed their diapers when they were little, or that their father cheated on their mother before they were born. Such scenarios may develop through coaching by the alienating parent or by overhearing the alienated parent or extended family, like grandparents or siblings, talking to other people about the alienated parent. The last manifestation of parental alienation is the spread of animosity, which is when the child's anger and hatred towards the alienated parent is spread to any other people the alienated parent is associated with. Alienated children will often refuse to communicate with or visit their grandparents, extended family, family friends, neighbors that they believe to be on the parent's side. They will even reject family pets owned by the alienated parent and reject half-siblings and other family members that were born maybe after the divorce or parents separated and that are new additions to the family. From the child's perspective, if their alienated parent is so awful and bad, then anyone associated with them must also be horrible. Children who've been abused in other ways do not appear to engage in this behavior. They're more likely to have ambivalence toward their abuser and this strong hatred. Again, if there's evidence for most of these manifestations of parental alienation in the child, then there'd be support for factor 5. We would not expect to see these in estranged children or children embroiled in a loyalty conflict. In summary, the 5-factor model, which builds on the accumulated scientific evidence on parental alienation, can help to differentiate children who've been alienated from children who are in other types of family conflict. Now, there's unfortunately been a concerted effort among some advocacy groups to suppress, mischaracterize, and ignore scientific evidence on topics such as parental alienation. Scientists who do work in this field are not unique. We've seen this in other domains as well, such as research on domestic violence, memory, and child custody. Dr. William Burnett has written extensively on common myths and mischaracterizations made about parental alienation, including the claim that it's just pseudoscientific or not scientific. Now, this is far from the truth, and even a small sampling of the citations I provided to you today, I hope, demonstrate this to you. There are many more that I can provide upon request. And I do not have time to cover all of the misinformation that's circulated out there. And hopefully what I've discussed today so far has already clarified some misunderstandings that you previously may have had. And to save time, I'm just going to describe a few other myths that have been circulating. One myth is that parental alienation is just a legal defense used by abusive fathers to get custody of children. In a large study of U.S. appeal cases that I published in December, less than half the cases where parental alienation was found to have happened by the court or an expert in the case had any claim of abuse at all. So it's not just a legal defense used by parents to get out of abuse allegations. And our study included 967 of the most recent cases where parental alienation had been alleged or found. And we did not restrict it in any other way to make that finding ungeneralizable. And there have been many studies showing that there aren't any gender differences in who is likely to be an alienated parent. I personally have published results from 4 representative polls in the US and Canada where we do not find gender differences in who's likely to be the alienated parent. Parental alienation affects fathers and mothers to similar degrees. Another related myth is that we should not acknowledge parental alienation because then abusive people will use it to harm the other parent and child. Now, obviously, for any type of abuse, there's always the risk of people pretending to be victims. It gives them an advantage, right? It gives them more power to claim these things so that they can have time with their kids while it's investigated, and then they have more quality time with the kid where they can influence the child. And this is the case for mothers and fathers. And that risk creates this need to have very clear standards and reliable screening and assessment tools so that people don't misuse that approach. And the five-factor model provides a standard, at least for parental alienation screening, to determine whether or not abuse and neglect are present. Because if they are, you would not diagnose parental alienation. Now, there's also a lot of people who claim that they've been abused when they have not been, to try to get a custody advantage. So a mother might falsely claim that the father hit her several years ago, or a father might claim the mother was neglecting the children. Now, we do not use examples like that as justification to say that domestic violence or child abuse should not be recognized. It makes no sense to deny the existence of any form of abuse just because there are people who lie about it. Another myth is that parental alienation is not in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual published by the American Psychiatric Association, and so it's not recognized professionally as a problem. Now, parental alienation is a problem in the child that's a consequence of the conflict and distress of their parents. This is why it doesn't have it appears as a V code. It appears as as something that appears as clinical significance in the DSM. Children who witness violence are pulled into their parents' conflicts and they experience distress, giving it the child affected by parental relationship distress V code, which you see here. It's also considered psychological abuse when a child is led to believe that a parent doesn't love them or abandon them. That's also a V code. In the last 20 years, important organizations such as the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychology, American Academy of Matrimonial Lawyers, the American Psychological Association, and the American Professional Society on the Abuse of Children have either directly or indirectly recognized the concept of PA, or parental alienation. It also meets the criterion for admissibility in the courts in the US, Canada, and many countries across Europe, most recently in Denmark. And in Brazil, it's recognized as a criminal offense, just like other forms of child abuse. Now, in summary, parental alienations are a form of family violence, and children who've been alienated can be differentiated from children who have not been. And it's important, really important, to stay up to date on research evidence in all its forms of family violence in order to develop effective policies to protect children and their families. And for sake of time, I did not even touch the long-term and short-term impact that this problem has on children and parents who are dealing with this problem. Parents, targeted parents or alienated parents, have the same types of symptoms that we see with victims of other kinds of domestic violence. See anxiety, post-traumatic stress. In my research, I found that moderately to severely alienated parents, 40% of them have thought of suicide the last year because of the loss that they have of their children who hate them for reasons that are not their fault. So I'm happy to share a lot more of that information if you're interested, but for sake of time, I want to have time to answer other questions you may have. Before I do, I just want to share some resources for you. If you'd like some more information, there's an excellent book published less than a year ago titled Parental Alienation, Science and Law. There are over 650 pages detailing the empirical evidence on parental alienation, assessment, treatment, interventions, and relevant case law in the US. And the Parental Alienation Study Group website is also a useful resource for more information. There are links to trainings, videos from conferences, and access to a bibliography of everything published on parental alienation through Vanderbilt University. Membership there is free, and you could obtain access to a newsletter that summarizes new research on parental alienation, updated information on treatment, and a host of other information. And if you or someone you know is dealing with this problem and you want some more resources, here are 3 books that can get them started. There are many other ones I could recommend. The first 2 are by Dr. Amy Baker, one written for parents who are just trying to co-parent with someone who's not cooperating very well, including cases where there's parental alienation. The other book in the middle here is a powerful book based on interviews with adults who've been alienated as children. They reflect back on what that experience was like and how they came to realize that they'd been alienated. And there's recently now a new support group and social media organization for adults who were alienated as children. It's called the Heroes Circle. And look that up, and it's adults who are now telling their story of what it was like to be an alienated child and lose all that time with a parent that was a safe and loving parent, but they had been led to believe that they weren't. And perhaps the most widely sold book is Divorce Poison, written by my colleague, Dr. Rick Warshak, where he offers strategies on how to protect children from the harmful effects of parental alienating behaviors. And there are many other support groups for parents, too, who are dealing with this problem. There's several here in Colorado, and there's many worldwide, and I'm happy to share that information if you're interested as well. And I have here my contact information, so you can reach out to me if we don't have time to reach me today. And I want to thank you for having the time today and giving your attention to learning more about this. It speaks volumes that you're open to learning about the scientific evidence on this and consider it along with all the other perspectives and evidence that you have at your disposal. And so on that note, I'd like to open it up for some questions and happy to answer as many as I can in the short amount of time that we have left.
Dr. Harman, would it be, I just want to ask Dr. Harman, could we post the presentation on